What's up, everybody? Welcome to this Tech Forces segment of the Hidden Forces podcast, where I speak with professionals, academics, and anyone else with a technological perspective on current events. My guest for this segment is journalist and commentator David Kirkpatrick. David is the author of The Facebook Effect and the founder of Techonomy Media, which seeks to promote conversations at the highest levels of enterprise, academia, and government about the role of technology in social progress. He writes at Techonomy.com. He's a contributing editor to Bloomberg Television and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. David Kirkpatrick, welcome to Hidden Forces.
Thanks, Demetri. Good to be here.
It's great to have you, man. Long time no see.
I know. You were at the conference, which just ended.
How did you feel about that? How did you feel about that?
Oh, feel really good about it. It was probably the best one we've ever done. We've had close to 20 conferences in total, and it's the 8th time we've done that flagship conference. I don't think you even mentioned the conference in the intro, but it's the Techonomy 2017 conference. Just happened in Half Moon Bay, California. Was from Sunday through Tuesday. And like I said, the 8th time we've done that 2-day flagship deep dive conference, and it was certainly one of our best, if not the best. It was really, and I feel more clear about what we're doing with it than I ever have, I'd say.
What do you mean? What do you feel more clear about?
I don't know if you noticed that I began the conference by a list of things that we believe, and that really kind of crystallized a new direction for us that, you know, we're not just about bringing people together. We're also about advocating for certain ideas that we really believe in, and we're advocates. We're not just neutral journalists. We believe there's things that businesses have to understand, businesses have to do, technologists have to do and understand, and we're not afraid to argue in favor of that.
So, what are those things?
Well, there's a bunch of them, but one of them is that tech is a force for good when you really seek to do good, but it's not intrinsically a force for good. I think that's very obvious right now with all the controversy around Facebook and Google and the election. You know, you have to really take a hand with technology and consciously steer it. And I think as we enter into more of a technologized society, and AI in particular becomes much more overwhelmingly part of everything around us, the ethics and moral values of the people determining how the technologies work are going to become more and more determinative in what happens in society. So we strongly believe we need people who are really well-intentioned and ethical and moral people or doing the AI, or we're going to be in trouble. We have all kinds of other things we believe in. We believe you have to take a global view. We think everybody's in this together on the whole planet, and businesses have to think in those terms. We really believe that the opportunities for business are truly global, and that if we try to bring all the people of the planet into the global economy, it's going to benefit them and also benefit business, and that's a big one. We also think that as we approach a world of AI, it's not something, like I said, that we can just go into blithely. We have to really be conscious of the need to use technology to improve the educational system. And when it comes to what happens to people whose jobs are displaced, we think that there's going to be lots of new jobs. But one thing we also believe is that universal basic income is a absolutely wrong-headed idea.
Well, I'm glad you agree
that is
with that.
not one that's going to be accepted by society, or we don't even think it should be advocated anymore, because it gives, especially at a time when technology has such a negative image that's rampantly growing at the moment, the more people hear irrational, selfish, elitist ideals like universal basic income coming out of leaders of tech, the more their skepticism about technology is going to grow. People want the dignity of a job and meaningful life. They don't want to just be given a handout. So there's a bunch of other things, but those are some of the things we believe.
Well, it's also not like a really constructive society that you can really bank on for the future. So is it fair to say that kind of an even more general way to describe what you guys do or what you're interested in is that you see technology as an increasingly disproportionately powerful force in society, and you're trying to find a way to incorporate your values or to inculcate values that are meaningful to all the players involved, whether we're talking about social responsibility, whether we're talking about global interconnectivity, whether we're talking about politics, whether we're talking about money, etc. I mean, is that kind of...
I mean, the way I think of it, aside from the fact that we bring people together, we are believers in certain values, we think technology is a very valuable lens through which to look at society and to interpret what's happening in modern life. And we believe technology is so deeply implicated in everything that's happening that if you think about the technology angle in the past, the present, and the future, you're going to have more insight into what's really happening. You know, technology is the central tool of mankind, and it always has been, you know, from the invention of fire. And right now, its pace of evolution is so astonishingly rapid and disorientingly rapid that we think that it's very valuable and almost necessary for anybody who's in a position of leadership, at least, and for anybody who wants to understand what's going on, to use that lens to understand what's going on. And also that if you do have values and goals to achieve things in society, technology inevitably is going to be a central part of the levers you're going to use to achieve the results you seek.
Do you think that many people, even people that were at the conference, that spoke at the conference, are, what's the correct term for it when you're like living in the clouds around what's possible and sort of thinking that technology is a solution to things that it is not, or not seeing the perils and the dangers? And I'm thinking very specifically, and I've got your, by the way, I have one complaint. You have such beautiful pamphlets and magazines that I never throw them away.
Good, that's intention. That's the
you got to talk into the mic,
we
David.
spend a lot of time making beautiful print products.
I don't like throwing
We don't
them
believe
away.
that everything is digital. That's another part of our way of looking at the technologized world, that if you go totally towards digital, you lose the human touch. And when it comes to our content, we have found that putting it on paper in a magazine, in a print program for the conference, etc., enhances its impact by a dramatic margin.
Well, magazines are awesome. I love magazines, and this is beautiful. You've got the cover of Techonomy 2017. This is the year-end magazine, right? Is artificial intelligence win, lose, or draw? And
question mark, yeah.
Question mark. And the
that was a big theme of the conference.
Well, okay. So here's the thing. So that brings us back to what I was going to say before I interrupted myself, because I was staring at your beautiful little pamphlets here, David. Is the panel that you had with Mary Lou Jepsen? Now there were other people on the panel, but she, first of all, I didn't even know who she was. Apparently, everyone knew who she was except for me. And I asked the question at that panel, and I was sort of, I feel like what I was asking was pretty commonsensical.
What was it? I forget.
It was essentially like, you know, she was talking about, you know, sharing our thoughts, and then she said, like, our capacity to share our thoughts using this technology is going to be moments more intimate than sex. And I'm like, first of all, you're not sharing your thoughts.
You're a Greek guy. Nothing could be more intimate than sex, right? Okay. Oh, keep going.
Come on, that has nothing to do with this. Look, what I'm saying is you're not sharing your thoughts, right? I'm not sharing my thoughts with you if we have a computer that's intermediating that communication. I'm sharing some half-baked idea that's in my brain that I don't fully understand.
I don't know. Look, I'm not going to say what's going to happen in the future, but I think she's earnest in saying what she believed is possible.
Yeah, but isn't that nuts?
I don't know. I don't believe it to be nuts necessarily. I think there is a lot of controversy, and even on that panel there was controversy about what is the nature of, quote unquote, a thought.
Well, let me tell the audience first to know who was on that
panel. But there is no
panel.
question that we're going to be able to decipher brain activity in a very thorough and ongoing way for trivially inexpensive cost in the very near future. So there's going to be some elements of brain reading as part of the way that society operates, for better or for worse. Now, whether that means, as she puts it, that we can, quote unquote, swirl our thoughts around with each other, I don't know. I'm skeptical of that a little bit, just because it seems so, in a sense, idealistic and so implausible based on where we are now.
But can I just reframe that a minute? Hold on. Let me just reframe that. And also let me mention to the audience that you had, this is a really cool panel. You had, how do you pronounce the guy's name? Rohit?
Rohit, yeah.
Rohit, who is the guy that oversees
Rohit
Alexa.
Prasad, who's the chief scientist in Alexa's learning, basically AI part of Alexa.
Yeah, you had a lot of really great guys. You had a lot of great
He's a top scientist at Amazon's Alexa division.
Yeah, you had a lot of great men and women and all sorts of panels and talks and stuff like that. So these were conversations that were going on at Techonomy with people who actually are influential in the industry in these areas. So I should point that out as well. But my point, so let's scale it back a second. When we're talking about thoughts, what I'm saying is that in Silicon Valley, for me, when I hear these conversations, they gloss over a bunch of assumptions that they just sort of assume that they understand what they're talking about when they talk about a thought, and that they're able to just simply translate that. It's the same way that Ray Kurzweil talks about uploading his consciousness to a server. I mean, to me, it's such an outrageous thing to say. It's not outrageous to dream
I think Ray Kurzweil's motives are very different from Mary Lou's. Let me try to interpret what I think she's doing. First of all, the company she's starting is initially trying to come up with a very, very inexpensive alternative to MRIs for medical reasons. And that's probably something they'll do in the near future.
Can you explain that a little bit, what she was doing?
Basically, MRIs require a very, very expensive device which essentially aligns the electrons in your atomic structure in order to read the shapes inside your body, right? She has a way of doing something very similar with infrared light, which is not invasive, much less probably health impairing, because, MRIs they do great diagnostic work, but, I don't think we even know what happens to our bodies when an external force, basically a bunch of magnets that powerful, realign our, physical essence so fully as an MRI does. But she's talking about developing a trivially inexpensive tools that allow us to see inside our bodies in order to do medical diagnosis initially. That's
ourselves,
her first
right?
goal.
It wouldn't be.
That would be down the road. I think first she's going to sell products that allow medical practitioners, even in the developing world where MRIs are absolutely unaffordable and non-existent, to do much more accurate diagnostic work with people. But what she's saying when she gets into this swirling our thoughts around, she's just trying to get a discussion going because of the technology trajectory that she sees likely. But it's sort of like, Moore's Law. She's saying we have to prepare ourselves for a society where we're going to be able to read our brain activity. And she's not saying she knows what that means. She's not saying she knows how, in what circumstances we'll want to do it. But she's saying the pace of the technology's evolution right now suggests some version of that's going to be possible in a relatively small number of years. And we need to begin a policy, a strategy, a business dialogue about what it means, and an ethical dialogue about
maybe
what it
I
means.
Misunderstood, because I did not get any sense from her whatsoever that she was concerned at all about who the gatekeepers were in this future.
Well, that wasn't
was
the
my
way
question.
she was talking about it as much on the session, I admit, but I know her very well, and I know what she's trying to do.
She would find that concerning. Well, because I'm telling you, like
It smells like pot in here, It really does.
So listen, it's so funny that you think it smells like pot in here.
No, it does smell like pot.
It does smell like pot in here. So look, I'm just insensitive to it because this is where we do our shows, and it always smells like pot. But it's very interesting that you say this.
It's a recording studio, so that does.
It's a hip hop studio.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, this is nothing. We're doing this right now at 5 p.m. on a Thursday. All right, you should come in here in the morning. So
Don't they have any ventilation in this place?
It's a soundproof place, man. It's got ventilation, but
Okay.
So listen, hold on.
You said we could talk about it. That's fine.
Don't worry, you're not going to get a contact high. We already had Heather Berlin in, and she's half your size, and she was fine. But the place was full of smoke that morning. So do you know Heather
Thank
Berlin?
God it's not. No.
So we did an episode a couple shows ago, and she came in, and it was like really,
Did she comment on it?
Yeah, she commented. We talked about it on the program, and I had actually spoken to your wife. I told her I was coming on. She said she wanted to pass by and be here, and I told her it was going to smell like weed, expecting that somehow, for some reason, David, I just assumed that would be okay with you.
Well, it's not that. I mean, I don't. I'd rather not smell it because, like I said, I used to smoke it a lot, and I don't smoke it at all anymore.
Because that's what
Anyway, keep going. I don't smoke pot at all, and I haven't for many years.
When did you stop?
Like decades ago.
Okay, so there's that. There's the pot thing. Where were we? Where were we in this conversation?
We were talking about brain changes, so I guess it's not entirely irrelevant.
It's not entirely irrelevant, and there's a lot of research that's gone into psilocybin research and.
No, but I think one of the points about the Mary Lou stuff is, and this is a big part of the way Techonomy looks at the world, and the reason we do our work and have our events and our publishing, is that the pace of technology's evolution is faster than most people really want to acknowledge. And, it's one of those things where you overestimate the impact in 2 years and you underestimate the impact in 10 years. I mean, we are entering into a fundamentally different world on many, many metrics. And it's incumbent on us to take stock of that for our own lives, for our businesses, and for our governments and our countries. And one of the reasons why, frankly, we do Techonomy is that as an American, I am so concerned and distressed that we have a government that is so fundamentally disregarding of what's happening with technology. I mean, aside from military uses, our government really doesn't show much awareness that we are entering into a completely different kind of economy. I mean, right now we have the advocacy for coal and, more drilling for oil and all that garbage. The reality is, every other country on the planet literally is basically thinking in more modern terms than we are. China, which is our, biggest economic competitor and adversary, is a highly technologically sophisticated country.
Well, they're also authoritarian, and
they're authoritarian, they may be stealing a lot of our intellectual property to achieve their goals, but they have no illusions that technology is the tool for social and economic progress. We do have illusions about that. And I would love to help dispel the illusions. I mean, we need programmers in Congress. We need data scientists in Congress. It's interesting. You look at Congress right now.
Well, first of all, you and I know very well that most of the engineers disproportionately that we know would not be very good running for
there are
public
some,
office.
And we'll have to find the ones that are capable.
But what do you mean, though?
Mark Warner was a CEO of a tech company, Nextel, and that's one of the reasons why in the Senate he knows what questions to ask Facebook, Google, and Twitter.
Well, Brian Ford is running for Congress in
Brian Ford was
California.
at our conference, and he's running for Congress, and he's a blockchain expert. That would be fantastic if he got elected.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I definitely agree that we should have more technological literate people in Congress, but I can't get too excited. Whenever someone starts running for Congress, I hold them to very high standards. I mean, in general, I'm very...
Well, then you must be chronically disappointed, because if you hold politicians to high standards, there are virtually none that can live up to them.
Well, okay,
in today's world.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm disappointed. I hold them to high standards. In other words, I'm not disappointed because I chronically have low expectations about what they can do, but I just can't get optimistic about
You're just
politics.
Not optimistic generally?
No, that's not true. I am optimistic about things that are within my sort of...
Yeah, because if you're not optimistic about politics, it means
I'm not.
Other great things may happen, and we will not have a society that can handle them, because politics is the vehicle by which we build the barriers, the guideposts, the rules and regulations that determine how society functions. And believe me, we are going to need a lot different rules and regulations for the world that I can see us headed into, unless we want to have something approaching total chaos. I mean, even just this stuff with Facebook and Google right now in the election is this very clear indicator of where we're headed. They built these advertising systems which were hijacked for political purposes because no one realized they could be.
So do you think that's the big... this is where I think we differ, right? I don't think that the, quote, Russians are the biggest threat in terms of the way in which these technologies are used.
I didn't say that. I said it's just indicative.
But
I said an advertising-based system that can be manipulated is an example of not having rules and understanding even of what systems already are governing society and how they ought to be managed.
But any system, hold on, David, any system can be manipulated, right? I mean, I think we agree on that, right?
Yeah, sure. And mostly we try to anticipate that as much as we can in advance and come up with some effective rules of the road to keep, things from going completely off the rails.
I'm more concerned about what the ad model in technology promotes through its own commercial interests rather than some sort of nefarious use.
What do you mean by that?
In other words, the way in which Facebook's algorithms promote garbage.
Well, one of the things that came up a lot at the conference
produce good content.
Is that the advertising is basically an attention-based business model where revenues and profits for the company rise to the degree they can seduce the user to spend their time looking at the screen. So they are incented to do whatever they can to get that attention.
Right, they're content agnostic.
And that leads to, as Roger McNamee, who was at the conference, said, the promotion of fear and anger as content, because that's what gets people to stare most, obsessively at a screen.
And they don't have to design the platform that way. They don't have to do that. Like,
well, advertising almost by definition militates in that direction.
Well, have you seen anything by Tristan Harris? He talks about the difference between the idealized self and the actual self.
Yeah, Tristan Harris is not a big fan of the advertising business model for these companies.
Exactly. No, so I agree with you on that. That's what I'm saying. Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, no, you can't have the ad model. No, I agree.
Well, that's all I'm saying.
Okay,
too.
no, we're in complete agreement.
What
on
other
that.
business model is there for these companies then, though? That's the problem. I mean, they don't really have an alternative at the moment. So the question of what constitutes reform is a very complicated one. If the fundamental business model that's built them a $500 billion plus market cap and the endless affection of Wall Street can't be substituted with something else.
Well,
that's
I think
a problem.
All right, well, let's talk about that. I do think that there are opportunities in the private sector for companies to build subscription-based models that actually provide quality content that begin to...
Yeah, sure, they're tiny businesses, but yes.
Well, it's tiny. They're tiny, but right, you can't have a mass market, but the masses are never going to be interested in digesting the high-quality content. That's just not something that people
aren't going to. You're not going to build a 2 billion person media business based on paid membership and subscription.
But you don't need to.
There are some alternatives that have been proposed, but they're hard to envision them being embraced by the current incumbents.
Like what?
Well, the most likely, in my opinion, is some kind of model that achieves the long-sought, still chimerical goal of the individual truly controlling their own personal data and effectively functioning as the gatekeeper to commercial interests so that the individual can approve or disapprove of advertising and other messages that come from them and to them. And if they do receive commercial messages, they somehow get compensated as part of that process.
So, okay.
And blockchain is often mentioned as a very logical, if possibly unlikely because of its current complexity, but that it might be a way that could enable the construction of such systems.
So that's a very good place for government regulation, right? Which has to do with, so there is this issue with the way that the U.S. legal system interprets and understands data privacy, right? I mean, like, we haven't done a good job with that. So that's a place where the spirit of the law doesn't follow the actual letter of the law. Or the way it's applied, or the implications of it, right? So that's a place where if we had more control over our data, so many other problems would be solved.
Well, do you know how long people have been trying to give individuals control over the data? One of the things that's
why
interesting
is that?
about
The reason
Facebook,
that we can't do it is because of money in politics and corruption in government.
among other things. Yeah, no,
that's it.
I mean, that's not like government's going to militate, is going to require a blockchain system. They don't even know the word blockchain, not to mention what it means.
Well, I don't even just mean that, but take
let me just interrupt
I'll say
and say
one thing. In Europe, they've had much better regulations, tighter regulations, higher standards of privacy and sort of the expression of digital rights than the United States, and that's come before any distributed ledger technologies or anything like that. So,
well, they're moving in that direction, but they are really just instituting that regime now, and the commercial implications of it are quite complicated, and they may be very expensive for companies to comply with, which might then cause these systems to be less either profitable or successful or used. But I will make a point that since I know a lot about Facebook, since I did write the only history that's ever been written about it, the Facebook effect, Facebook actually did represent a major leap forward for the control of privacy by the individual. And it's not often understood properly, but the way that it did that was by allowing you to determine who your friends were on Facebook. That, in effect, in the earlier years of Facebook, gave you control of the flow of information that was coming to you. Even to this day, you have the judgment and the option of whether or not to follow a site, follow a page on Facebook, and that is largely what determines what you see as the consumer of data. So that does give you a modicum of control, which seems meaningless at this point because the quantities that are flowing there are so vast. But it's very different from, say, Twitter. I mean, Twitter has certain critical similar features, but it doesn't give you nearly the same control.
So I can't verify this because I've only experienced it myself. In other words, I can't prove it. But on Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, I've seen my Instagram account follow a bunch of accounts that I've never, ever, ever followed.
And those are probably advertisements. They're just throwing ads
no.
at
You don't understand what I mean. I mean, I've gone into my followers and I've seen that randomly in different moments.
That shouldn't be
happening.
I
think that they don't need to actually do it to actually show me that, but I think that they're constantly tweaking and messing with their algorithm, and they're doing all sorts of stuff. I mean, we know they do that. So.
I'd have to look at their terms of service, and I don't know if it addresses this directly, but for them to follow other people on your behalf would seem to me to be a violation of the trust that they have with their users.
So they definitely have done that.
Really?
And yeah, they definitely did it, and I don't think that it necessarily shows up to the other people that to say, "Oh, Demetri followed you." I think it's just something where they just screw around with that kind of stuff. I don't know how that works, man. All I know is I've seen it many times where I've gone into the accounts because someone will show up on my feed and it's not a promotion or it doesn't look like a promotion.
Really? Wow.
That's happened on Instagram many times.
But what's the point of mentioning that, if I might add?
Well, because that goes back to that undermines your point about the fact that we don't control.
I was talking about Facebook, not Instagram.
Yeah, okay, fine. But Instagram is owned by
has
Facebook,
some elements
so there's a lot
that are
of
similar.
crossover.
I'm saying the structural design of the Facebook service gave you control in a way nobody ever had before. To some degree, Twitter, Instagram, and other services, Snap also, have imitated this function. But Facebook, by allowing you to determine who showed you information because you had to accept them as a friend or follow them as a page, that was a major leap forward on the internet in terms of controlling the data flow to you. That's all I'm saying. And so
as
the
opposed
point
to
is,
turning on your television and getting a broadcast commercial?
well, I mean, in that sense, yeah, you kind of decided what channel to watch, but
it's more invasive.
From a digital flow point of view, Facebook pointed in a direction of something that has not really been very much followed up on, except in the quote unquote followership model that Twitter and Instagram and others have copied from Facebook. But we need a fundamental advance in the control of data flows, and we need a fundamental advance that's very parallel to that in the control of our own personal information by us. And even though that has been known as a need for well over a decade, it has not been something that has been achieved at any commercial scale by anyone, except to the limited degree I mentioned in the case of Facebook.
I don't know. I find Facebook, I don't even know if I could give them any credit at all for anything that has to do with giving me more control over anything at all.
Well, at this point, it's easy to not give them credit, but they've gone through a number of other phases in their history, and their architecture did represent a step forward in user control. That's in my opinion.
I guess. I don't know. All I know is that they've gotten worse and worse from my experience.
Well, you could say they've gotten greedier and greedier because people are jumping all over them to buy ads from them, and because they're the most targetable ad medium in history, and everybody wants to get ads in front of the right people, and Facebook is the system that makes that easiest and cheapest. So that's why Facebook's business prospects are vast.
Do you think that there might be a market competitor that'll show up and put Facebook out of business? Maybe even a blockchain or DLT related social media network?
Sometime, yeah. How soon is the question? I mean, I don't know. I would say if you were guessing, eventually, if there were a system that did the same kinds of things that Facebook does and put them out of business, the only way I can envision that happening would be probably something that had a blockchain element to it. But the reality is, the way these things tend to work is that what will put them out of business is the rise of some other new kinds of systems that command attention that would otherwise go to Facebook, not that are quote-unquote social networks, because that is essentially a passé concept in terms of current innovation. Obviously we want to have data flows with other people, but we don't have to have a quote-unquote social network structure to do it. I think Snapchat actually does represent a step forward that is quite potentially powerful, partly because they vet every ad. Well, they sell ads much more like a TV network sells ads, and as a result, they have much more control. So the potential for abuse on Snap is much lower. So if you notice, Snapchat has not been the slightest bit implicated in any electoral manipulation.
So a blockchain or DLT related system that doesn't have the burden of proof of work and that can scale actually theoretically wouldn't require an ad-driven model, because everyone could sort of participate in maintaining the ledger themselves and maintaining the network themselves and using their computing power, and that would be basically the way that you enter the network.
Yeah, somebody's got to make some money somewhere along the line in order to justify the effort to put it all together. But yes,
not that much. I mean,
probably not that much.
Not
and
enough.
I'm not at all disputing that something like that is possible. I absolutely agree with you that something like that is, at least in theory, possible, but it doesn't seem to exist at the moment.
The question is, are we gonna survive? Are we gonna have a war with North Korea before we get there?
Yeah,
So
that is always a question.
What do you think of all this stuff? So you opened Techonomy with a video. What was that video that you put up?
The video was starting out by showing, the election of Donald Trump, and then
who you're a big fan of. You voted for Trump, didn't you? Twice.
Right. Twice, yeah. Then it was the next day. Our conference opened the next day. Wednesday, the day after the election last year was the opening day of our conference. And that night, Mark Zuckerberg came and spoke. And that's when he said it's a crazy idea that fake news on Facebook affected the election. So we showed that video. We showed the Trump getting elected, Wolf Blitzer announcing it on CNN. Then we showed Zuckerberg saying this at our conference the next day. Then we showed some brief clips just demonstrating how fundamentally wrong he was. And, we had a Ari Melber clip from MSNBC from the last few weeks just listing some of the more outrageous things that were fake stories that caught gigantic traction on Facebook that are at least presumably very much pushed by the Russians during that period. So, we were just trying to show that technology doesn't always have good consequences. I mean, it goes to my point before, which is one of our big beliefs, that technology is only good if you develop it with good intentions and deliberately try to seek to make it good. And you have to be very careful to try to militate against it going bad. And it's always a risk.
Do you really think that Russian intelligence, the interference of Russian intelligence operations, were what caused the loss of Hillary Clinton's campaign?
I don't know. That's nobody has yet shown that, but there is reason to think it could be true. If you look at the narrowness of the margin in Wisconsin and the uptake of some of these fake ads and very divisive posts from non-advertising based Russian facilitated accounts on Facebook and Twitter, and how powerful they were received in Wisconsin in the months and weeks prior to the election. And, Hillary only lost Wisconsin by like 20,000 votes. So, Wisconsin and Michigan were in Pennsylvania. Those were the critical states. Wisconsin and Michigan were the states. And, it's conceivable, I think, considering the closeness of the victory and the criticality of those states, that ads on Facebook and other content on Facebook that was planted by the Russians had enough of an impact that it swung the election. That's not certain. I don't know that. It's definitely possible. I've not heard anybody say it's not possible.
Were you happy with Hillary Clinton as a candidate?
Well, she wasn't my favorite, but she's damn better than Trump. I mean, I think she would have, been a
but Trump
good
is a catalyst. He is a catalyst, right?
I mean, for some things, sure. I mean, I don't want to. I didn't come up here to talk politics.
Yeah, well, you put the video up at the conference, so I figured
we were just talking about reality. Trump was elected. Zuckerberg said fake news had nothing to do with it, and Facebook, and we showed that now that is seen as a real possibility. That's all we said. That's what our little video was intended to demonstrate.
So, what do you think? Let's bring it back to technology here. What do you think the most exciting single technology is on the horizon? Is it blockchain? Is it, AI is hard to even call AI a technology, obviously. It's not a technology, clearly, and there's so many things that go into AI. It's such an intersection of data and analytics and computation and all this stuff. But what sort of do you look at and think, this is really, or renewables, right, because of the issues of climate change and global warming. What do you kind of look at and say, this is really exciting? This is really...
I actually, to be honest, right now, looking forward, I don't see one quote-unquote technology that gets me tremendously excited. I will tell you a technologically driven change that I expect, that I find exciting, and that is the Internet of Things as a tool to much more exactly control and monitor our use of energy as a means to combat climate change. That is probably the biggest single promise, in my opinion, of the Internet of Things in coming years, is that we can essentially instrument our consumption and production of energy so that we really don't have the waste we have today. And that could be a very big deal. So that matters to me. That's something I'm very excited about, because I think you want to talk about things to worry about. You know, the changing climate is a genuine thing to worry about, and probably one of the very small number of things that we most need to be focusing on working to address right now. So, you know, yeah, virtual reality goggles are cool and they're going to happen in some form. They're happening, and we'll be able to feel like we're in the, you know, Côte d'Azur. But that doesn't get me excited, like actually putting a real dent in human energy, reducing carbon production so that we can have a climate that doesn't, you know, basically burn us to death, so that the polar ice caps don't melt, so that the Gulf Stream doesn't stop, you know, so that Europe doesn't turn into an ice age. These are real possibilities.
Well, a lot of those things are already baked into the cake. They're already baked into the cake.
No, that's not true. They're not baked into any cake. Nothing is baked into a cake.
Well,
Nothing.
A lot of the warming is already baked in based on the
warming might be baked in, but we can still do.
No, I'm not saying we can't. I'm not saying we can't.
We can still do geoengineering. Don't forget that. I mean,
but geoengineering is not going to turn the ice cube back into a cube, the melted ice on the counter. In other words, what I'm saying is that
yes, it could definitely. You could refreeze the polar ice. I mean, you would be very hard pressed to be exact about it enough at the moment, based on what we know, but. There's no question that if warming were to get out of control and people really did begin to be worried about things like the cessation of the Gulf Stream, which is one of the biggest things to be concerned about, then you could geoengineer that into probably being sustained.
Hold on. When you say geoengineer, you're talking about extracting greenhouse gases from the upper atmosphere.
No, I'm talking about basically blocking the sun's rays from hitting the earth.
Right, but... Okay, right, but but in order to do that, if you wanted, let's say you melt the ice caps. Let's say
it's not easy, and it won't be foolproof.
It's more than just not easy. You're talking about decreasing the temperature
but when you
of the
talk
earth.
about things baked in, I'm saying, Demetri, we are a technologized society. Basically, there is no more nature. People are in control. That's one thing you have to get a grip on. There is no nature.
I don't know if I agree with that. Well, I just interviewed Gavin Schmidt actually for like an hour and a half.
There's a great book by
Stuart
Brand called Whole Earth Discipline that talks about this that I think is quite important.
So look, I'm not coming at this from a place of saying that we can't influence the warming, that we aren't causing the warming, that we aren't probably the 100% cause of the warming, that we can't influence it, and that we don't need to influence it. All those things are true. What I'm saying is that a lot of the warming that's going to happen has already been baked into the cake. That's how detrimental and scary this is.
It's been baked into the cake in terms of the carbon that's in the atmosphere now. If we didn't do geoengineering, that may be the case, yes. Well, but we have the ability to do geoengineering. Don't pretend otherwise, because it's definitely possible.
Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think
it's not easy.
I think this is a distinction between us. I think that you think that, and it makes sense. Obviously, I mean, it's built your career on really believing in what technology can do. I think that there is an overestimation of what technology can do, and I think we live in an age where we see all these things like Elon Musk taking moonshots and, you know, autonomous driving vehicles and all this stuff, and we see all these amazing things that the technology can do, but I still think that nature actually is in control. I don't actually think people are.
In the larger scale, nature is in control.
But that's what climate change is. It's large scale.
We're just like a tiny little planet in a vast universe, and we don't control the universe. I'm not saying that, but I think when it comes to the Earth, people have already changed the atmosphere, and particularly the atmosphere and climate. People have changed it willingly, willfully, or inadvertently, but it is because of people that we have the atmosphere in the form we do today. So we have to take responsibility for that, and that's one reason, you know, elementary point, I support the Paris Accords, but I do think if we don't succeed in reducing our carbon production enough to slow the warming, you know, either we're going to lose Bangladesh, we're going to possibly have an ice age in Europe, or we do some drastic things to try to control the atmosphere. And maybe in the interim, we could find time to improve our energy production capabilities so that we can stop producing so much carbon. But, you know, and it's not just carbon, obviously. It's also, you know, methane is actually much, much worse. And we don't even, you know, that's we're trying to get rid of regulations on that in the United States.
I did an interview just before having you on the program, which is not out yet, and it'll be out at some point. I don't actually know when I'm going to release it. I had planned to release it in a week from now, but it'll probably be released in a couple of weeks with Gavin Schmidt, NASA's the director of the Goddard Institute, the guy that replaced Hansen, and we talked the entire time about climate change, about modeling, about the data.
Did you talk to him about geoengineering? Did he bring it up?
We talked a little bit about it towards the end, and he just, the point was, there's some stuff that you can do, but
people like him don't want to talk about it because it seems like it gives you an out. I mean, if you are somebody who wants to really advocate for responsibility on carbon,
so where are
then
we
you
with
don't want to be
geoengineering?
talking about geoengineering because it makes people go, oh, screw it, I won't bother no longer driving my, flying, for example, which is the worst thing we do. I won't bother stopping flying. I will just wait for geoengineering to solve the problem. And you can see why someone like that doesn't want to address it.
Well, that could be true, right? But let's talk about geoengineering and sort of the facts of geoengineering.
And I'm not an expert in geoengineering, by the way. I'm not.
Well, I just haven't.
But I know enough to know that it's generally possible.
Well, I haven't read anything that makes me believe that it's going to be a solution anytime soon. And like I said, it
could be done at any time.
Well, what do you mean?
All you have to do is put particulates in the upper atmosphere, and you can start changing the amount of radiation that hits the Earth. That can be done. It's just adding reflectivity in various ways. You can also float gigantic pieces of styrofoam in the oceans, which is another thing that has been proposed to reflect more heat back into the atmosphere, back away from the Earth. There's a lot of things that can be done if it gets urgent enough.
Where are these proposals coming from, and how expensive
are
they?
There aren't proposals for much of that because they're very expensive to do it right. One of the interesting things about geoengineering, which I did not come here today to discuss, but one of the interesting things about geoengineering
you brought it up.
To do elementary geoengineering is not that expensive. Any billionaire could afford to do, or any country could afford to do significant geoengineering. Currently, it would violate all kinds of global laws to do that. But if you were Bangladesh and faced with the disappearance of your country, you might say, screw it, I'm going to do it anyway. We had a session at an earlier conference, Techonomy, a few years ago, where someone who's very well informed on this predicted that future wars will likely be fought over geoengineering because some countries are going to have such divergent interests from other countries. And countries that are going to disappear or be radically harmed by sea rise will be much more incented to do geoengineering than countries that are fundamentally, not affected. But the weather will be affected for everybody, and that could affect rainfall, it could affect agricultural yields, it could affect all kinds of things. And, people may fight physical wars over this.
Well, I haven't seen or read it, and maybe that's just because I haven't found the right sources, but I haven't seen or read anything that tells me that anyone knows anything about how to do geoengineering in any realistic way. But
you should read more about it because they do know how to do it.
Okay, well,
it's not being done because it's still considered super risky, because it's very hard to know how much of anything to do when you start messing with the climate.
That's what I mean, though.
Yeah, but we're messing with the climate already, is what your guest that you just interviewed was talking about. We are messing with the climate, so either we stop messing with the climate that way or reduce it, or else we're going to have to mess with the climate another way. That's all I'm saying.
What a disaster that would be. You know what that sounds like to me? Man. You know what that sounds like to me?
It's a disaster already.
Yeah,
the climate is changing.
No, but
check
it
out.
That's.
Did you notice?
Yeah, but David, that sounds like a disaster to me. What you're describing, that's like when like.
Hey, it was a disaster already in Puerto Rico.
That's
in Houston.
That's like when I knew guys that juiced in high
school. In the Philippines,
I knew guys
in Mumbai. They've had flood. Come on, man, this stuff's happening now.
No, I hear you. All right, but I knew. Okay, so we grew up in different times. I grew up I went to high school in New York in the late '90s. That was like people were taking steroids and juicing basically in high school. Lots of people were doing that.
Wow, that's a non sequitur, but go ahead.
No, it's not, and I'll explain why. So people were taking steroids. A lot of people were taking steroids that I knew, and they were and taking growth hormone, whatever else. I mean, they were messing around with their body's hormones, and to counteract one thing, they were doing it with another. That happens with other drugs in general, right? Yeah. That's what you're describing.
We're already doing that.
No, what we're doing is we're adding carbon and greenhouse gases.
Sustainable energy is it's just doing something else to compensate for something else we already did.
But that's like the natural approach. That's like saying I'm going to stop taking drugs.
Fossil fuel. And now we're doing windmills and solar because we did too much of that other thing. You know?
Yeah, but I'm saying the one example, David, is saying, okay, we've been screwing up the climate by doing X. We're going to do less of X. That's like saying I'm addicted to heroin. I'm going to start taking less of heroin.
Okay, well, let's start doing less of this heroin that we're doing.
But what you're with geoengineering would be, if people start unilaterally messing with the atmosphere.
The only reason I brought it up is you said it's inevitable that the warming is going to occur. That's all.
Well, I didn't say that. I said a lot of it's already baked into the cake.
Okay.
So I think, anyway, we're talking past each other here. My point being
I'm just saying
that
bake a different cake.
My point is it's a serious issue. But this is where I wanted to go with that before we went off on this tangent, which is, okay, global warming, agreed. You and I both agree on this. This is a very serious matter, more than not a good thing. Yeah. And we get into it with Gavin Schmidt. We talk about the effect it would have on sewage treatment facilities.
How worried is he? Was he pretty?
Look, I mean, I'll tell you what he is. He's scared probably of political correctness around all of this stuff.
But he's not scared of social disorder as people.
No, I'm sure
really
he's scared of all that stuff. But what I noticed when I spoke to him was that, this is such a politically correct topic.
Here's just a quick note that a lot of people don't remember to put together. This is already affecting geopolitics. One of the reasons Syria turned into such a disaster was they had a multi-year drought prior to the Arab Spring in Syria. That was part of what precipitated the desperation and has led to the enormous. It's not just war, it's also drought that led to vast migrations. A lot of the immigration troubles in Europe are driven by drought-driven suffering in the Middle East, as well as political suffering. So, and same with African migration to Europe. A lot of it is climate-related.
Yeah, for
sure.
So
let's not pretend that this isn't already affecting geopolitics.
For sure.
It is.
100%.
Yeah.
100%, I agree. No, but I wasn't even saying geopolitics. I was saying there is a lot of political correctness around this subject, which there shouldn't be. In general, there's one of my pet peeves is that the left and the right are both ignorant, the vast majority of people, about science, and they use it in different ways.
I know,
I hate that too. It
really
drives me nuts. What specifically about that drives you nuts?
GMOs. People that get all hyped up about GMOs are people who think they shouldn't get vaccinated. Those are things on the left. Or people who don't believe in climate change is caused by humans on the right.
But also, what about...
Those are equally idiotic.
But here's the thing. What do you think about this? The way the left uses the word science and fact. Does that bother you, the way that they use that word?
Sometimes it does, yeah.
They don't understand what it is.
Yeah, I mean...
They, right? I understand that I'm using generalities here and I'm stereotyping.
That kind of broad brush statements, I'm a little reluctant.
Well, you and I live in New York, so we're surrounded by progressives, and we are generally sort of liberal people.
We're surrounded by people, many of whom make excessively credulous left-wing generalities that aren't always accurate. I will say that. And GMOs is a good example. There are a lot of people who think, that'll harm you to eat food that's genetically modified, whereas there's zero evidence that has ever been marshaled to show that it's the case. And in fact, if we don't genetically modify foods, I'm going to get a lot
of shit from the audience for what you just said.
We'll never feed the planet.
I think GMOs.
If we don't modify food, there's not going to be enough food to let people who listen to your podcast who are all basically rich people in the Western affluent parts of the world.
There are a lot of rich people that probably listen to this.
If you want to see a world that's really fair, where the hundreds of millions of people in Africa and India and Southeast Asia and Latin America come up and have a middle-class lifestyle, you're going to have some GMOs to feed those people.
Who was the guy that told us we're going to eat crickets? And by the way... John Chambers. So who's John Chambers?
John Chambers is the longtime CEO of Cisco, who took it from 70 million in revenues to 50 billion in revenues, who turned over the CEO job about 2 years ago to somebody else, and who's about to retire as executive chairman. And one of his many investments, he spoke at the conference.
Well, he was laying on the sales pitch pretty hard.
He spoke at Techonomy 2017 on Monday morning, and he is concerned about many of these things. And one of his solutions is insect protein, because it can be produced for 1/7 the carbon and environmental impact of meat. And it's very high protein and very digestible.
What did our mutual good friend and former guest of Hidden Forces have to say about that morning, who came afterwards?
I don't know.
Christian Mespia. He mentioned that he's had crickets. I forget what he said exactly. It was pretty funny. The point was, there's I've had them. They're, somewhat chewy, and I wouldn't recommend them for large quantities. Something like that.
Well, people have eaten insects throughout human history.
Yeah, I know.
And what I didn't know until he said it is that actually it's a more digestible form of protein than a lot of things we already eat.
I would take everything that John's saying with a grain of salt. I mean,
well, look into it.
I'm going to have to, because I do actually think that the food crisis.
I think insect protein's a very good idea myself.
Have you ever had any crickets?
Yeah, I've had crickets. I've had ants. I've had grasshoppers.
Nothing counts before you were.
I have had crickets too. Yeah,
not before you were 5. It doesn't
no.
count.
In China, they eat this stuff. If you're ever in Beijing, they have these like the street food where they have
scorpion kebabs.
They have all kinds of things being roasted there.
Did you eat anything from there?
I've tasted some of that when I was in China. Yeah.
How did you feel
I think
afterwards?
That's where I had a grasshopper. Actually, yeah.
How did you ate grasshopper?
It's good. It's all right.
It's all right.
I'm a creature of habit, too. I had a hamburger for lunch. What can I say? And that's probably not environmentally responsible of me. It was grass-fed, though, if that matters.
Where did you get it from?
A restaurant.
I mean, a restaurant? You didn't get it from, like, what's that burger joint in New York that everyone goes to?
No, it was. I don't want to say what restaurant. It was a good restaurant.
You got to talk a little bit into the mic, David.
It was a good restaurant,
away from
but
here.
Yeah, you're hearing me. Don't worry. Keep going. Come on, let's stick with technology.
So we talk about climate change. The other thing, so that's your big worry. But what about things like antibiotic resistance, like, super microbes? These are giant nonlinearities that are just sort of like
I'm
walking
sure those
around.
are worrisome. I don't know that much about that, but yes, I worry about. I mean, to the degree I know about that, it sounds concerning. Sure.
So one of the other big things in the conference that you guys had was stuff on health and food.
We have a lot on health.
Right, health and food, those sort of two.
Well, yeah, we didn't have as much about education this time, but that's a big thing we've talked about much in the past, too. And those are sort of 3 areas where we think technology has the near-term promise to have enormous impact. So we like to look at areas where technology's positive impact is already being evident and where, with the right understanding and efforts, it could be radically accelerated to achieve very positive results for humanity.
Isn't that also?
Health is the biggest one by far.
And that also creates an interesting problem, does it not?
How about so? What's that?
Which is that people will be living longer. I mean, the idea is that, we all want to live longer and healthier lives. It's a problem.
So you think if we improve global health, it's a problem because people will live longer? I mean, that doesn't occur to me, Demetri, I got to tell you.
Okay, well, actually...
It's not that we, I think we can have more sustainable lifestyles and, maybe we need to have children, at a longer interval. I didn't have my daughter until I was 39 and my wife was 40. So, I did my part there. What can I say?
Yeah, but hold on. Wait a minute now. I don't think that's fair. So I'm not saying that improving health is bad. What I'm saying is that on the one hand, we have a society that's built off of traditional biological, what's the terminology? I mean, we've got structural demographic problems because of our social welfare programs. And at the same time, we're making people live longer. People want to be able to live longer. And we have issues about climate change and population growth and all this stuff. I mean, I just don't understand how all this stuff is supposed to work together.
It's very hard to engineer every last aspect of society, and I'm not claiming that I know how to do that either, although I think I disagree with some of your premises.
I think what's obvious in all this stuff is that it's for a small class of people. Like, at the end of the day, this is not
for a small class?
All this stuff, like...
if it is, then I might as well just hang it up, because I'm not interested in it just being for a small class.
Well, neither of us are, but the reality is that the economics drive it.
I mean, I'm in the elite. There's no question. That doesn't mean I think all the good stuff should only come to people like me.
I agree with you, David. I know you don't feel that way, and I feel the same way. But I'm saying is the economics drive it that way. The economics are driving us in that direction, man.
To be honest, I'd argue just the opposite.
Really?
Yeah. So I think you have a globally rising middle class that is essentially demanding that they be treated with the respect they deserve. And that's, you can see that in all kinds of ways. You see it in trade flows. You see it in, communications. You see it in political power. I mean, look at China's rise. China was an impoverished nation 40 or 50 years ago, like destitute. It was 1 billion destitute people. And now it is a country of middle-class strivers who are hardworking people who want everything we have. And, about 450 million of them have already gotten it. And they're already living a lifestyle that's not that different from ours.
I wonder
if that's another 600 or 700 million to go. But, that's just the way it is. People aren't going to just sit back and say, oh, I always lived in a hut. I'm going to stay here. Once you get communications to the world and people can see how you and I live, it's all over for, they've got to they want what we have. They want some version of, longer lives, better health, better nutrition.
Are they actually healthier now in China than they were 30 years ago. I mean,
damn right they are.
I've read longitudinal studies that came out of China that showed that they had some of the lowest incidence of cancer and all this other stuff. And now with the air pollution, I mean, I'm not sure
well, they're
about
not
that.
in poverty. I mean, you saying they would have been better to keep living in villages, in huts with no education and subsistence farming?
No, but what I'm trying to say, man, is that it's not like so straightforward. And also, I think we don't know what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years, right? So all these investments the Chinese have made in building up this economy and polluting their air and being an export-driven giant, that may come back to haunt a big portion of that investment, a large portion of that investment. I don't know. I'm just saying, I think I just see much more peril in all of these things.
Well, I don't know who's going to get haunted by that, because from the standpoint of the leaders of China, if you don't increase the living standards of the people, the Communist Party's are not in control anymore. So, they don't want a revolution, so they're going to keep working to improve the standard of living of the Chinese people. That's just the way it works.
But there are physical limits to that. They're not in full control of that.
Maybe not, but they haven't hit the physical limits yet. Their growth is still like 2.5 times our growth. And it's still pulling more people out of poverty every year.
There's a lot of bullshit coming out of China. There's a lot of bullshit numbers and a lot of...
Yeah, they're still pulling a lot of people out of poverty every year, however many bullshit numbers are coming out. They're numbers I wouldn't necessarily trust by any means. But that doesn't undermine the reality that they are having huge success at bringing their country into the modern age.
So what's going to happen when all those jobs get automated?
All what jobs?
All those manufacturing jobs in China, they get automated in the next few decades.
I thought it was interesting. One of the real themes of the conference that came up on a number of occasions was how many people are not really worried that the net impact of automation is going to be a diminution of jobs. Many people at the conference said that the net impact of automation and robotics and all these wonderful things, or worrisome, scary things, could very well be the creation of additional employment. The problem is the transition, because the new jobs are going to require different skills, different capabilities than many of the people who lose their jobs in the old areas that get automated away. So, and it's especially problematic for a country like ours that has such a primitive education system that's basically designed 100 years ago, where we don't have either good liberal arts education or good vocational education, both of which are going to be needed. And to be honest, China's also doing pretty well with some of that stuff. I mean, I don't think I want to live in China. I'm not saying that. But
right.
The fact is, transitions can be achieved, but, there's a lot of possibility of job creation that goes along with automation in the future, because the basic thing about automation is it allows you to do more. And as you do more, you do more. Like, for example, in construction, one of the things that was discussed on it may be that, what percentage? 40, 50, even 60, maybe more percent of the labor currently required to build buildings is no longer needed because of automation. But maybe because of automation and efficiencies that we're able to achieve, we'll be building 500 times more buildings, because that's needed in the world. There are 4 billion people that basically don't have housing.
You're not worried about population growth.
Actually,
I think it's a huge
population
potential
growth
problem.
is actually slowing. But that's not related to what I'm saying. The point is, even just with the population we have, because, as I said before, they really want places to live, and they want, buildings in which to work and all that stuff. There's going to be tons of construction. It's just one example. The point is, we may be able to build things more efficiently, therefore build a lot more stuff. So even if, on a per building basis, we use less labor, we may still have more jobs. And that kind of logic applies across the economy. It's not a certainty.
But their population would be...
It's not a certainty, but you know what gets pissed me off? People talk about truck drivers. Oh, their jobs are all going to go away. You know how many truck driving jobs are going begging in the United States right now? They're paying a lot of truck drivers over $100,000 a year and giving them equity in the companies because it's so hard to get them to come to work. Truck driving is one of the biggest unfilled positions in the United States economy today. Maybe people don't want to do it because it's a little dehumanizing. Maybe automation will make it a little more enjoyable. I don't know. But I'm not going to start worrying about truck drivers going away when people don't want to do the jobs that are out there now. And that's the fact. I think the last figure I saw was that 60,000 open positions for truck drivers in the United States right now.
Look, I don't know about truck drivers. I don't know about open position for truck drivers. I know that, and this is not something that you're going to find statistics for because even all the polls that they do for people on politics are proven completely unreliable. But I think that we've got some major schisms going on in society, and I think
that's not something I'm going to argue with.
But I think that the way that technology is being applied is a big part of that.
It is. I don't dispute that. But, listen, it's the way it's being applied in a society that has a totally shitty education system. Look at all these states where Trump won, and look at the quality of the high schools, the elementary schools, the vocational education. Many of those people live in places where they really don't have the resources they need to make the transition to a modern economy. No wonder they'd be pissed off. I'd be pissed off if I was them too. I'd want change at any cost too. I don't hold it against them for voting for Trump or voting for change at any cost.
But I think you're making it, for me, it sounds to me like you're making it a lot simpler than it is, right? To just fix our education system.
It's not one thing. It's a whole set of other things,
it's so
too.
many things.
But that's one that's very easy to point to, the sheer obvious inadequacy of our educational institutions and their inability to really prepare people for the world we know we're entering into.
I agree with that, but even colleges, for example, man, like colleges where you pay for it, they do a shitty job of educating you.
Yeah, I agree.
And even if they didn't do a shitty job,
do.
The world is changing so rapidly that it's so difficult to keep up. Like I think that the headwinds are so great that this is going to require a lot of sort of thinking on our feet. And it's
what, individuals or
individuals?
Or
Absolutely, individuals.
So we're going to go to a Mad Max scenario, and I'll be out there just thinking on our feet, trying to stay alive.
You're
well, what do you say? But
what I'm saying is that,
you sound
like,
very pessimistic to me.
Yeah, I mean, I am kind of pessimistic. Like, it's like a bad thing to say that, right? I am kind of pessimistic. And in fact, with Gavin Schmidt, for example, my concern towards the end of the conversation was, okay, we've talked about this stuff. What are you doing individually, given what you know? I mean, you have access to all this data and information. If anyone should have a serious opinion on the subject, it's you. You're looking at this. You're saying, okay, maybe in 20 years there'll be regular flooding in downtown New York City, let's say, hypothetically. What are you doing? And he said, well, we're eating more sustainably. No. Because what are you doing? You've got a daughter. What are you doing personally? How are you making changes given what you know? And he had a very, good answer, I think, an honest answer. It was a nice answer. It was basically like, I'm not going to get into it here, but point is he didn't have an answer for what he was going to do individually. But what I think and what this show is really about for me is it's not about collective activism. It's not about let's get everyone to work together so we can solve these communal problems. I do think that's a requirement. I think we need to be able to do that. There are other people that can provide those answers and that kind of motivation better than me. What I think we do need to do is prepare ourselves individually, because like it or not, individually, we're going to have to deal with a lot of the stuff that's coming our way. And whether that's using this show to educate yourself on what's coming your way technologically, scientifically, ecologically, whatever, or whether it is just eating healthier or whatever it is, like you've got to take steps as an individual first and foremost, because I just don't believe that this really, what's the word to describe our shitty government? I find politics in the United States completely disheartening. I mean, look at all the stuff that came out with the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, and they were funding the DNC. I mean, it's hard to look at government and say, okay, like I feel really optimistic about the future.
Right, but I'm not quite sure why you said all that. But
I said it because
I disagree with some of that, but I don't. I mean, I'm actually more of an optimist. I think that collective action is necessary. I think all of us have to work together to achieve a positive result for society. And ultimately, I am much more interested in putting my shoulder to the wheel in the context of a movement of people who care than simply sustaining myself in the long run. And I do sustain myself. I have plenty of selfish habits, selfish consumption habits. But one thing, for example, that I think I recently realized is going to really be a big change in coming years is flying is going to become very, very bad politics. Because as climate change gets worse, and we really do recognize the need to reduce carbon emissions, that's the way that individuals most contribute to climate emissions is when they fly. It's like 50 times worse than anything else they do, or maybe 100 times worse. It makes driving a car seem like environmentally responsible. So, there's going to be changes, and I'll probably have to make changes. I like to travel around just like anybody else, but I do believe that people together are going to be able to adapt. So that's my basic belief. I think we'll adapt. I think we'll have a good society in 50 years. And, it's going to take a lot of work, and I'm trying to contribute to that work.
Well, I mean, you do a great job with that, David. I did enjoy going to Techonomy 2017. I'll be there for 2018. It's great exposure, great ideas. I actually had a lot of cool conversations. I had some cool conversations on blockchain with a couple of people, including Kathleen from Tezos, which is
blockchain
in the
experts,
news. Yeah. So, I mean, look, man, I think we actually disagree on more than I realized. But at the same time, I think that I like you, David, because you're a good guy. I was telling your wife on the sideline, and I was looking forward to having. What's that? As President Trump ignores climate change, federal disaster planning, or what is this? What is this thing? I can't read off.
New York Times
your
alert on my Apple Watch.
So what did he do?
As President Trump ignores, this is just the New York Times article. As President Trump ignores climate change, federal disaster planners are wrestling with how to prepare communities for even bigger floods. It's obviously a feature story that they're promoting on their alert system. But I think it's just funny that came up right while we were talking about it.
Well, a lot of stuff comes up with, I mean, there's a lot of crap out in the media. And, obviously Trump is Trump. There's not much to say
there.
The
point is, floods. We were talking about that. There's going to be a lot more floods, and we got to start dealing with that. And hopefully we'll take the bigger steps to remediate climate change, slow it down by reducing our output of carbon and methane into the atmosphere. And all these things fit together, and you have to think of them all together.
So, David, thanks for coming on the show, man. It was great seeing you this weekend. It was great.
Glad you were there, Demetri, and I'm glad you're coming back next year.
No, man, I enjoyed it.
We love curating these conversations, and like I said, we have a certain amou't of passion around it, as you can
You're
tell.
very passionate. You're a tough interviewee, and you're a funny interviewer, by the way. But the audience knows I bring up Techonomy a lot. It's the swankiest conference period. I love it. And you guys had great red wine. The cab was really good. It was actually really good.
It's the ideas that count to me, since I don't even drink. I don't even know.
You don't even drink either, huh?
No.
You don't smoke. You don't drink. What are your vices?
I don't know. I mean,
you have no vices left.
I have plenty of vices.
You must have gone pretty hardcore when you were.
I did go hardcore when I was younger.
I mean, that's what I'm sensing from you. That's what it sounds like. You went cold turkey.
Yeah, I was a freaking hippie and a punk, both. I went from a hippie phase to a punk phase, and believe me, in both those phases, I did my share of substances.
Yeah, you're still a hippie. You're just more cleaned up. So, David, thanks again, man, for coming on.
Thanks, Demetri.